The idea for Vulcanizzato came around from the invitation from the Pinacoteca to be part of their programme which Beyond the Collection, which is looking at the existing works in the collection. And the idea is to have a dialogue with the pieces in the collection. And the invitation was to work with the two plaster casts by Canova. And he's an artist that I'd been thinking about a little bit in the last few years because, as well as my practice as a visual artist, I have a project with a designer called Becca Lipscomb. We have a fashion label called Atelier EB. And through doing fashion, we discovered that it was very difficult to find mannequins to work with. And thinking about the influence of statues on mannequins, or even now the use of digital technology with mannequins, it made me think a lot about Canova, because he's someone that, through his use of simplification and abstraction, does something really special with the human body. And I think it's very, very influential on the way we think about beauty today. And I thought there could be a really interesting conversation between the idea of commercial mannequins, statues, and sculptures. When you come to see the exhibition, you will see several sculptures by Canova, the ones from the collection, and 3 mannequins which I have brought to display, and a backdrop painting which they all kind of interact in front of. The reason for the backdrop painting is because one of the Canova statues was originally shown in front of a wall painting. Thinking about what would make a suitable backdrop for a sculpture, of course part of it should be green, it should be a garden or a landscape, so part you will see a garden. But there's 2 other areas. One is interior, and the other is a street scene, because statues can also live in these 2 environments, the urban public environment or the private home of a wealthy private collector. And of course the thing with Canova as part of neoclassicism is that neoclassicism, a defining characteristic is always its proximity to power and powerful patrons. So because I'm working with the Pinacoteca, I thought it'd be interesting to include a figure from the Agnelli family in the mural. And I thought about the way in Turin you have these specific figures of the designer Carlo Molino and Gianni Agnelli, and they're both important sons of the town. But they share some characteristics. They were both aesthetes, they both cared deeply about interiors, but they also were men who had a public image as kind of men of action. They were sporty, men about town, involved in industry, very clearly kind of masculine roles. So how did that sit with their love of interiors? Well, in both cases, they are men who in a way used women as a proxy to express their love of interior decor. In the case of Carlo Molino, he did photo shoots with models, a lot of them sex workers, in his homes. And so they're there as this vehicle to express his love of interiors. And with Gianni Agnelli, there's many, many beautiful books showing the many houses and artworks and gardens of the Agnelli family. In every case, it was Agnelli's wife, Marella, who's depicted in these rooms in beautiful clothes. And I noticed that you never once see Gianni alone by himself in a house. It's always in the context of the family. So I thought I'd make a little scene with these Turin figures doing what they enjoy, which is hanging around thinking about soft furnishings. So they have swatches of fabric and magazines and cushions, all the things you associate with interior decor. And of course, statues live there as much as in the street or in a garden. I've been thinking for a long time about the representation of women in public space. Last year, in 2001, I was invited to participate in a sculpture biennale in Geneva, and I chose to make a bronze cast of a mannequin that I found in an old warehouse for second-hand, a bit like unwanted mannequins, so it felt a bit like a graveyard. And I chose a mannequin, I cast her in bronze with the idea of the ultimate anonymity of a mannequin, and the way that they're there to become vessels to kind of pour in identity, to wear clothes but not wear them too much, not to overtake the clothes. And it's a bit the same with figures in public space. Many women are there to be express a kind of impossible ideal or a virtue, it's less likely that you would see a statue of a woman in a public place and she would be a real person who's being celebrated for her achievements. She's usually a cipher. So with the mannequin as a statue, it's also thinking about the way that a statue embodies something very special about time and permanence. By casting a mannequin in bronze, it's making them even more durable. At the beginning of the 20th century, mannequins were very fragile. They were made of materials like wax and plaster, but now they're made of fiberglass and they're kind of indestructible, and we have landfill full of them. But I thought that mannequins as a symbol of a kind of hypercapitalism and a very specific kind of body type which is shaped by capitalism and is an expression of our beauty ideals of the day, that these could be interesting to put together. And then of course that relates to Canova because he's part of an aesthetic logic about beauty. And with his work, the works on show here, they're really about expressing basically fabric in motion. Nominally they have a kind of subject which is a dancer, replicating the dancers that were seen as wall paintings in Pompeii. But the real subject of these statues is the virtuosity of showing a body in motion and the way that fabric and more ephemeral material like flowers or hair, how that can be depicted, and that's what is done so beautifully. The title Vulcanizzato is a word that came to mind because I know it from the manufacturing of shoes. When you bind a rubber sole with a canvas top, it's called vulcanization. But then that's also a process connected to the car industry because it's to do with tires. It's about like strengthening rubber. But then also makes you think of certain mythologies. Vulcan is a god, volcanoes. So I thought it's a perfect word to encapsulate everything. There are 2 mannequins in the exhibition which are wearing clothes, and they're interacting with the part of the painting that looks like a street. They are modern mannequins, ones that I think are the most modern I could find because they have more realistic body proportions, and they are they're quite ambiguous figures, and they have like body characteristics of both like non-white and white people. It feels very modern and very thoughtful. And I've replaced the head with the head of a Soviet war hero. She was a woman called Zoya, and she was part of a kind of Soviet mythology of the Second World War. She was murdered by Germans, and she's very frequently celebrated in public statues in Russia. And she's wearing a dress by a modernist couture designer called Madeleine Vionnet. And she's a designer that was very influenced by neoclassicism, and just like those classical forms like the chiton tunic worn in ancient Rome and Greece, her designs were really, really simple geometric patterns, but then on the body in motion, they come alive and they're activated and they're very sensual. So these mannequins are wearing dresses by her, and I just loved the combination of the idea of a war hero wearing couture fashion on a mannequin, and they're placed so it looks a bit like they're walking into the painting. For me, the idea of being a woman alone in a city in a beautiful dress, that for me is the ultimate symbol of personal freedom. But it's also a trope that we know very well from thriller and horror films, the idea of the vulnerability of a woman alone. And I'm a big fan of Dario Argento and all the films that he filmed in Turin, so there's another reference to our beloved Turin sun in the show.